Time to start tonight. If you would like to grab a psalm book, we'll sing a psalm before our devotional, and then we will, have our ending to the Melting Pot series tonight with Brother Arvey, and of course the three different classes in the basement for our younger ones, all the way up through the 6th grade. If you would mark 961, there is a balm in Gilead, 961. We'll sing this song as the invitation following our devotional thought in a moment. Beforehand, we'll sing 610, I Love My Savior Too, number 610. 610. As we begin tonight, let's sing the first and third verse, and invite you to stand, please, as we do so.
Good evening. I hate to do this, especially since we have such a professional preacher in our midst going to deliver us a class here in just a moment, but I'm about to break one of the cardinal rules of good preaching, and that is you're never supposed to start a sermon with an apology. You're never supposed to start a speech with an apology, but I've got to start with an apology tonight because I'm going to present the same devotional this evening that I presented at El Reposo this afternoon at the nursing home, and there were several folks here from the congregation that were there as well, and so you're just going to have to hear it again, Pancho. I'm really sorry about that. But the reason for that is because today is the only day I can do this devotional. Today is it. After this, it's gone. This isn't one of the ones you can come back around to and repeat necessarily, because today is a special day. Not only is it New Year's Eve, not only is it the last night of 2023, but have you noticed, has anybody pointed out to you how the numbers play out today? This was weird. My brain doesn't do this, but somebody else pointed it out to me. It's the 12th month, the 31st day of the 23rd year of 2000s. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which coincidentally is a waltz. So if anybody in here likes to dance, this is the waltz. You're welcome to not here, but you can do that later on tonight if you'd like to. I know that because I spent the afternoon up in Iron City under a bridge. And it's not as bad as it sounds. It's actually pretty good. I was doing a wedding ceremony for a couple, and they wanted to get married on the banks of the creek there, the river where you used to put in for the canoes and the kayaks and things like that. And they wanted this wedding date to be theirs, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, because of the number and the value of it and things. And I got to thinking about that in the literary significance of that idea. You know, if you find that that lamp, and it's a magic lamp, and you rub it, and the genie comes out, what does the genie give you? He gives you 3 wishes, right? And if you're a little blonde-haired little girl who gets lost in the woods and you find a cabin in the middle of nowhere and you go inside and there's porridge and chairs and beds, that's probably the house of the what? The 3 bears, right? You got the three bears. It's not just like fairy tales and stories like that. Shakespeare has these rings of 3. He's got friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. These sets of 3s. At this time of year, we focus on the past and the present and the future. There's bigger ones than that. You got the Father, the Son, the Spirit. These sets of 3, which are so significant. And then there's what Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Now abide these 3: faith, hope, and love. And the what? The greatest of these is love. As I was thinking about those 3s today, and we're down there at the water's edge, and we're thinking about the past, the present, and the future, and the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and the greatest of these is love. I read a passage from a book we don't preach from very often, the Song of Solomon. You got to be real careful when you open up this book, but it's safe tonight. But I wanted to read a passage from Song of Solomon, chapter 8. The Song of Solomon, chapter 8, beginning in verse 6. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, and jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. When the Bible tells us that the greatest of these is love, and you start wondering why, you start wondering what it is that makes love so powerful and so great, and these words from the Song of Solomon ring out. Love is stronger than death. It was really fun today. Today was the first time I've ever had to take a 4-wheel drive to get to a wedding ceremony. That's a first for me. I know I've been in Alabama for a long time, and maybe it should have happened sooner. But today was the first. But we had to make sure that we're in a big truck because we actually had to drive across parts of that, that river, that creek going through there. And if you took a smaller car, then the current could just pick that vehicle up and take it downstream. And, you're just out of luck. Song of Solomon says love can't be washed away like that. Love is stronger than that. Why is that? Maybe one of the reasons is because of what John says in 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. Our beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loveth knows God, for God is love. If we want to make this year end on a good note, and we want to start off next year going the right direction. I know that there's food we're supposed to eat tomorrow, and I know there's rituals we're supposed to do if we can stay awake all the way to midnight, and there's other things that go into it. But if there's one thing we could focus on, it's the power that the Bible tells us exists in love. The greatest of these is love. And if you look for ways in your world to find that and then to share that with others, you'll make a difference. God will make a difference in you and then through you. And tonight, if you need to experience that love in a more personal and direct way in your own life. If you don't have that, if you've lost that first love, or if there's anything else that we can do for you, now's a great time to ask for help. If you just come forward now as together we stand and sing this song.
We're thankful that you're here tonight. No better way to close out the year 2023 than being here worshiping together this evening. If you did not have the opportunity to take part in the Lord's Supper this morning, if you will, exit to the door to my right, and one of our men will be there to serve you. Just a few little reminders, announcements. I don't have much tonight, but I failed to mention this morning, but our Lads Bible Bowl will be Wednesday night at 5:30. Any of those who are participating in Bible Bowl with Lads this year, you'll meet Wednesday night before church at 5:30. So make note of that. I mentioned this morning our youth has several different things going on these next few weeks. I think one of those things is this Friday morning they'll be meeting for breakfast at Jack's at 6:30 a.m. More power to you guys getting there at 6:30. I know I wouldn't make it, but I know that would be a good time. I know Lucas and Amanda would love for you to be there and to have breakfast that morning. Also, several other things going on, so make sure you make note of that for you youth. Family devotional books, those were available this morning. I couldn't remember if I mentioned that this morning or not, but we wanted each family, the elders wanted each family to get a copy of that. So if you did not get your copy, there's some more copies on the front pew, so feel free to pick one of those up on your way out tonight. I want to continue to remember all those on our sick list. Steve Tucker having surgery this week. Remember him, as well as Paul Dodd and all those others on our sick list. Just continue to remember them in your thoughts and prayers. Does anybody have any other announcements before we're dismissed class? If not, we will be dismissed at this time to our classes.
tell, she's had to deal with me early and often. Well, it is the last night of our time together, and I've really enjoyed this. I thank you for letting me come and do this. Thanks for all the kind words that people have said about the class. I hope that it has been interesting to you. I hope that it has been educational. And I hope as we begin the new year, all of us will commit to reach out to people in the new year, especially people who may be of a different faith background. Don't be afraid, don't be intimidated, because they're just like us. They're people just like us. And as we talk to them and get to know them and ask questions, which is one of the very, very best ways to do it, about what they believe and what they hold near and dear, that will give us then the opportunity to show them the full truth about Jesus and the Father the Father that we adore and that we love. So please set that as one of your goals and resolutions for the new year. I cannot go without saying thank you also for all that you do for us for Haiti as a sponsoring congregation. Appreciate the elders and Todd and all the mission committee and all of you that are involved in that good work. And we pray that 2024 is the year that God opens the door for us to go back and be with those brothers and sisters down there. So we were talking about Scientology last week. We're going to finish them up very quickly and try to also get through one more faith group tonight. And as we talked about last week, Scientology is a church, technically. They are filed as such with the IRS and declare themselves to be a church. They're very heavy with the use of celebrities. They like to use celebrities and put them out front. They were founded by this guy. Who can tell me who this guy was? L. Ron Hubbard, and they like to call him what? Initials. LRH, right. Okay, there we go. I knew y'all had it. Okay. All right. And so here is one of their org centers, as we'll talk about, the Church of Scientology. So we'd gotten to the terminology. Let's go through the terminology, and what we'll see is that as we explain some of their terms, we'll understand kind of their teachings. I don't want to say theology because it's not theology, it's teachings, okay? So let's start with the word thetans. This is central to their teaching. It's from the Greek letter theta. They believe that extraterrestrials will themselves to come to Earth long ago and to possess the bodies of humans. Now, L. Ron Hubbard never clearly defined how long ago this happened, but his son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., said after his father's death that he believed his father told him once it was trillions of years ago. So trillions of years ago, these extraterrestrial spirits came to Earth and possessed the bodies of humans. And so if you are a thetan, all of us have a thetan in us, and for all intents and purposes, it's parallel to what we would call the soul, okay? Physical body and the soul. Well, because of all the bad stuff that happens to us, all of that gets stuck to our reactive minds, according to Scientology. Whenever there's abuse, whenever there's negativity, whenever there's suffering, and that kind of builds up. It's much like karma that we talked about with Hinduism and other faith groups. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to get back to your operating thetan, the OT. So you're pre-clear. All of us in here right now would be considered pre-clear because we have not begun the process of trying to get to our OT, our operating thetan status. And while we're enrolled in Scientology, those who are and who are going through the steps, they are clear, but they're trying to get to the operating thetan status. Everybody with me? Clear as mud. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, we all have these extraterrestrial beings that are in us, and they were good when they came to Earth, but because of all the bad things on Earth, over time, the trillions of years that they've been here, all this bad has built up, and so Scientology now says, we've got a way for you to peel all that back and get back to your operating thetan, which is your peak performance, your best self. Okay? Now, the way that they do that is through what they call auditing sessions. We would call it counseling, or, well, it's akin to counseling. And what they do, initially, they would have times where they would come into areas and they would say, your first session is free. Sometimes they're $15. And then what do you think happens to the prices as they go on into those sessions? They go up. They go up, okay? Now what they do is they use e-meters. Anybody ever seen these before? This is technology that was actually, they have a patent on this and claim that they invented it, but they didn't. The Nazis are the ones who actually started using these machines. And some of these machines, not these exact ones, but the concept, can be used for legitimate purposes. But you can see the one on the top left is the older model. It kind of gives a clear definition of what it is. The one on the right is a newer one. You can still see it's in a case, but it's got the two cylinders out on the left and the right. So what happens is you have two cylinders that you hold, one in the left, one in the right hand. And then they cut the machine on, and it sends a low-level electrical charge through your body from one to the other, passes through the body. Then they begin to ask you questions or to get you to talk about certain areas of your life. And based on what the needle does on the machine, as you talk about those things, then they can figure out, okay, this is an area where we need to work on, this is an area where you're good, or whatever the case may be. And so the goal then is to use these e-meters and the auditing sessions to help you move from pre-clear to clear to your best self, which is operating thetan. And by the way, L. Ron Hubbard taught that there were 7 levels of operating thetan. Level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, if your income is based on getting you to move through the process, what happens when you get too many people that get to level 7? You run out of ways to get money from them, right? Okay, so they've introduced a level 8. Miscavige and maybe one other are the only ones that have reached the level 8. And so that way they can continue to get money from people and all of this. And if you've watched any of the Leah Remini specials, she also talks about, and interviewed a lot of people in there, that talked about they would make changes in the publications. Somebody would have every book that they're supposed to buy from them, and then they would come back and say, we made a change on page whatever. You've got to throw all those out and buy brand new sets of books, because it is a printing process, really a money-making process. KSW means keeping Scientology working. So if you remember with Islam, there was a doctrine where in Islam you can lie if it protects Islam. And we're going to talk about in the next faith group, they have a similar doctrine. That KSW is the Scientology version of that. They can lie, they can misrepresent the truth, whatever they've got to do to keep Scientology working is fair game if it's for the benefit of Scientology. The orgs are organizational centers. That's what we would call churches. And the closest one to us is Nashville. There used to be one in Memphis. Lisa Marie Presley was a Scientologist, and she brought an org center to Memphis, but she got out of Scientology before she died, and that center has closed. So the closest one to us is Nashville, then Atlanta. You're probably not going to find one in Florence, Alabama. They like big cities. Why? Money. You got more people, you got more opportunities for money. And so more people that are their targets. Suppressive people are people who have been in Scientology and have come out of Scientology and have to be shunned. The term that we never talk about, disfellowship, well, they call it shunning. And when they do it, they cut people off. So Leah Remini would be somebody who is now a suppressive person. Antisocial personalities, L. Ron Hubbard taught that there were 2.5% of the population fell into this category and were people that were going to be difficult, could be reached, but they would be difficult. And then the PTS, that is potential trouble sources. Let me give you a hint. All of us in this room are PTS. We're potential trouble sources. L. Ron Hubbard taught initially that people like Genghis Khan and Hitler fell into this category. But then as Scientology grew, he kind of changed that, and he said, well, basically anybody that's against us, anybody that says anything negative to us or will not accept what we're teaching, well, they're potential trouble sources. And as we said last week, they don't like criticism. They will not take criticism. And if you say something bad about them, they'll come after you. If they get hold of the Facebook broadcast here, they, probably don't care anything about a peon like me, but you never know. They do not like bad publicity. David Miscavige is their current president. He was an assistant to L. Ron Hubbard and took over when L. Ron Hubbard died. He and Tom Cruise are best friends. His wife and Leah Remini were best friends. And when Leah Remini began to question some things in Scientology, she began to have conversations with David Miscavige's wife. David Miscavige's wife dropped off the face of the earth. And she filed a missing person report with the LA police. And they cut off all communication with her, and then finally the LAPD said they met with her, and she said, I want nothing to do with her. So that's what started Leah Remini. She started having questions, and she would see contradictions and have doubts. But when Miscavige pulled the plug on his wife, being her friend, and she, they've been best friends for 20 years. And it was all well and good when she was a star and everything was good and she was out front advertising for them. But he is currently the head. So, a couple of things that have really done damage to Scientology. 2015, HBO did a documentary called Going Clear. Very well done if you ever get a chance to watch that. Very well documented. They interview some high-ranking people, and that really was detrimental to new people coming into Scientology. And then Leah Remini there on the right with the guy that has been doing that series for her, with her, and they also do really, really good stuff. All right, any comments or questions on Scientology before we move on to our last group? What has kept them from being classified as a cult by the government? David Miscavige, L. Ron Hubbard and Miscavige, they're smart people. They actually got a lot of their Scientologists to apply for jobs with the Internal Revenue Service. And the government, the IRS was into it with Scientology for years over their 501c3 status. And they were trying to say, you are a business, you are for-profit, this is in no way a church, you're just, playing the system. And he actually pushed a lot of Scientologists to apply for jobs with the federal government and the IRS specifically. They rose up through the ranks. It took them about 15 years or so, but they got to the point where finally the IRS one day just declared, we've decided you're a church, we're going to leave you alone. And ever since then, the feds have left them alone. I don't. Well, I would think that it is, it's a possibility that it is something that they then use against people. Because if you are with a counselor and you think what you're saying is confidential and you say certain things, then if somebody wanted to use that against you later and say, well, I don't want the public to find out about this, yeah. And so there is a rumor, and y'all know what a rumor is. A rumor may or may not be true, so let me clarify, this is a rumor. But there is a lot of speculation that may have happened with John Travolta. Because John Travolta is a Scientologist, but if you notice, he is not out front all the time like Tom Cruise. But you know when John Travolta comes out? When there's an issue, when there's a challenge, when the government starts doing something, or Oprah or somebody says something negative against them, and all of a sudden they trot John Travolta out. And there's a lot of speculation in the people who run websites and other things that are critical of Scientology that they're using things from those auditing sessions against him as kind of blackmail. Now, whether that's true or not, I have no idea. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. But it could be brainwashing, but it also could just be, okay, you don't want to leave us because we got the goods on you. You know? Yeah. Yeah, Leah Remini was separated from her mother. If you don't know the backstory on that, and she was told that she was honored by being chosen for the Sea Orgs, which is the group that works on the boats, and they separate young people from their parents, and then they do basically brainwash them to bring them up in that. Yeah. All right, let's move on. I want to mention something just very quickly, because this is important with the last faith group. Especially in our faith system, in the churches of Christ, we hold out the view that Barton Stone and Alexander Campbell and others were just guys who just on their own, without any kind of outside influence, decided one day, you know what, we're going to go back to the Bible. There were other things going on around them that helped move them to the point where they decided to do that and to study and discover and do that. And that is the Great Awakenings that have gone on in the U.S. And so there's 3 Great Awakenings. The first one is Jonathan Edwards. This took place in the New England states. He saw that the colonies had become prosperous, people were getting wealthy, and he said people are getting away from God, away from what we believe. And so he preached, he came up with a great sermon. And that famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And he preached that all over, and there was a great revival. And the generation that was impacted by that great revival ended up declaring independence from Britain and fighting the Revolutionary War. Now, there was a third one, and we've all heard of Dwight D.L. Moody from 1875 to 1885. But the one in the middle is the one that's important for us in the churches of Christ, because James McGready, that's a name that we've heard, but it started in the late 1700s and kind of worked its way through about 1840, but started in Kentucky in and around Cane Ridge. But it was all over the eastern seaboard. So it's in that environment that this group came about. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, what's another name for them? Except that's not a name that we can use anymore for them. Because if you Google Mormons today, you'll be redirected to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you check Mormons.com or Mormon.com, you'll be redirected to, did you mean the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? And this is because in 2018, Russell M. Nelson, who is their apostle and first president, he's 99 years of age. He said that God spoke to him and told him that the name Mormon is offensive to God and a victory for Satan. And so it is no longer to be used. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir is now known as the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. They do not like the name LDS, although the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is acceptable, but they don't like the term LDS. So I'll go ahead and apologize now, because I use old habits are hard to break, so I use them interchangeably, and I do not mean to insult anybody. What's interesting about this is, starting in 2010, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints spent millions of dollars on a campaign, and you probably saw television advertisements for this, that said, "I am Mormon." And this campaign ran from 2010 to 2018 when Russell M. Nelson had this revelation from God that told him to stop this. And so they spent a lot of money on this, and as you can imagine, there was a lot of publicity about it, but we'll explain how they explain that in just a moment. So the only two acceptable names per them is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Church of Jesus Christ, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They allow the Book of Mormon because they say that is a person's name, and we'll discuss that in a minute. They claim to have 16.8 million members. About half of those are outside the U.S. In 1990, they had a 6% growth rate. Today, it's less than 1%. The internet has impacted them, their growth rate hugely, because of so many websites that have been set up by former Mormons who have studied their way out of it and who know how to discuss with those who are of the Mormon faith the contradictions and the issues and help them. So if you ever get a chance to study with someone of the Mormon faith, I would encourage you to go online and look at some of those sites, because they give you some fantastic tools about questions to ask and things to kind of probe with them. Now, here's an interesting fact. Their growth really has plateaued. 45% of Mormons who leave the LDS Church become atheists, agnostics, or none. Okay? Now add to that, that's 45% that leave. In addition to that, 21% of people who leave say, "I still believe in God, I'm still a Christian, but I will not be a part of any church, any religious group." So that's 66% of the people who leave are done. And that is because the Mormon Church teaches, if we're not true, nothing is true. And so, if one of them finds out that the Mormon Church is not true, they've been taught all their life, if they've been raised in it, well then nothing is true. And so 2/3 of those who leave the Mormon Church are going to leave and go to nothing. So that's why it's important for us to study with them and say, there is truth. Let's go to God's Word and find that truth so that you can understand that. 50% of their converts that they do get come from other Christian groups. They've always really been considered a fringe group until 2012 when Mitt Romney ran for president. And they did a fantastic publicity campaign to try to be considered mainstream, and from that point forward, they say that they're just like any other group. Now, prior to 2012, they would tell you, we're the only one that's right, everybody else is wrong, y'all have no truth whatsoever in you, but now they kind of have softened on that. All right, so let's talk about this guy, because he is the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Joseph Smith, Jr. He was born in upstate New York. He was the fourth of 9 children. He was born during that Second Great Revival. And he lived pretty much his entire life. That Second Great Awakening ended in 1840, so he's at the end of his life. But he was heavily, heavily influenced by that. His family were Presbyterian and Methodist. The Mormon Church teaches that he was disturbed even as a young child by all the religious division. When he was 15 years of age, he went into the woods and he was praying to God, and God told him, "I do not want you to join any of the churches around you because they're all wrong. I'll show you what the truth is." And then 3 years later, when he's back in the woods, that's when the angel Moroni appears to him and says, "You have been chosen to interpret the story of Jesus coming to America, appearing to the people here, of the lost tribes that came over, and the plates that we will show you. So that was in 1823. And then 4 years later, in 1827, he received the plates that happened to be buried under a tree very close to his house, and he began then to translate them. We do not have time to talk in depth about the background of the Book of Mormon. It covers a 1,000-year period. I'll just quick brush. Covers a 1,000-year period, 600 BC to 400 AD, roughly. It is about what they believe or they teach, the lost tribes of Israel coming to America. Two of those tribes getting into fights, they're fighting back and forth, and Jesus coming after He ascended back to heaven, raised from the dead, ascended back to heaven, that Jesus then left heaven again, came and appeared to those groups in America and told them to stop fighting. And from there, you kind of have the process of they were believers, and then a few hundred years go by and they get back into a fight, and one group kills the other group, and the surviving group becomes the American Indians, the Native Americans. So they believe that the Native Americans who were indigenous to this land are actually descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. He received the plates, and he began the translation process. Now, the way he did the translation process is he had two stones. He called them Urim and Thummim. Where have you heard of that? 7 times it's mentioned in Scripture. He would put them in his hat. He would put the hat, his face down into the hat so that there was no light could come in. It was so tight. And that's when the letters would appear to him to translate, and for him to call that out to someone who was sitting at a table nearby and who wrote out the Book of Mormon. The interesting thing about him is he had already been convicted and found guilty of pulling this with a guy. They called him Joseph Smith, the glass looker. You can go online and see the court papers on this. In 1826, he was found guilty of trying to defraud somebody, and he was fined $2.68, which in 1826 was probably a lot of money. But this is the process that he used then to translate the Book of Mormon, they say. And the Book of Mormon was published in 1830. The group began to grow. They began to focus especially on wealthy widows. Alexander Campbell, in one edition of the Millennial Harbinger, writes about this group of people and how they are targeting widows, especially widows who have farmland. And they'll come in and they'll help her and they'll do all these things for her, and then before you know it, that farmland is up for sale and they get the money. Now, there's another reason Alexander Campbell was upset about this. We'll get to that in just a minute, but a more unique connection. So the Mormon group, because they're different, because they're teaching something different, they move. They move from New York to Ohio to Illinois, and it's in Nauvoo, Illinois, that story that we don't have time for, but Joseph Smith and his brother get arrested, and Joseph Smith ends up getting killed. So when he dies in 1844, the group splinters into 7 different groups. One group, his widow says, my son, our son, Joseph Smith III, he should be the leader. That group left and goes back to Independence, Missouri. Another group that split off there was the group that, what's the guy's name that was arrested for the young ladies, Jessops, Warren Jessops, has been in the news a few years ago. That was one of the groups. We'll touch on one of the other groups here in just a moment. But the largest group followed Brigham Young. And this is the group then that moved from there to what would become the state of Utah and Salt Lake City, and established it and carried forward. So when you think about the Mormon church today, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's this group from Brigham Young who was their second leader. And by the way, polygamy was taught by them from the very beginning. Anybody know why they dropped the teaching of polygamy? because they wanted Utah to become a state. And the president of the U.S. at that time told Brigham Young, people are never going to accept Utah as a state as long as you teach polygamy. And so guess what? Brigham Young said, we don't teach it anymore. And that's how it stopped. And that also then caused some other groups to break off who said, you can't do that. You're just doing that because of statehood. All right, so they have 4 written sources of authority. The Bible, as long as it is accurately translated, and guess what they say about the Bible that we have? It's not translated correctly. So Joseph Smith did his own translation. The official translation of the Mormon Church is the JST, the Joseph Smith translation. And what he did was he just took the King James version of the Bible and went in, and anywhere there was a contradiction with what he was teaching, he said, well, that's been corrupted, and he changed it back, or changed it to what he said was back, but was actually, of course, incorrect. He did the work before he died, but it wasn't published until after he died. There's about 3,410 verses that are different between the KJV and the JST. Some of those are major, most of those are just minor. The second book is the Book of Mormon. That's the one that we know most about. It is a fact that even the LDS Church cannot deny that there have been over 4,000 changes to the Book of Mormon since it was first published in 1830. That's why if you want to buy an old copy of the Mormon Bible, or of the Book of Mormon, it's very, very high because the Mormon Church is trying to buy up all those old copies. Now, they have an answer for this, okay? So I'm going to read you what the official answer is as to why their book that was a revelation from God has changed. You let me know if this doesn't sound right. God usually communicates in concepts rather than words in order to avoid misrepresentation. While these concepts are divine, the prophets to whom God speaks are human. Therefore, the wording of revealed doctrine often has to be revised to make its meaning clearer. What do you think about that first line? Let me say that one again. God usually communicates in concepts rather than words in order to avoid misrepresentation. It's not. It's the opposite, isn't it? Because if you give somebody a concept, well, that can be interpreted a lot of different ways. But if you just put something down, now, written words can be interpreted wrong. We know that. But it's a lot less likely if it's written down. So that is their view of things. Now, where then did the Book of Mormon come from? Well, there was a congregational minister by the name of Solomon Spaulding who published this book in 1812 as a work of fiction. He put it forward as a work of fiction. And there's evidence that we don't have time to go into of 2 different places that Joseph Smith could have come in contact with this manuscript. What we do know, he died before the Book of Mormon was written. But his widow and his children spent the rest of their lives suing the Mormon Church in courts all across America for plagiarism, for stealing his book. There's another book that probably had some influence as well. Of course, the Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews, but they deny that. All right, then the second one, the third authority source for them is called Doctrines and Covenants. It was written in 1835. It's some commentary by Joseph, supposedly that Joseph Smith told other people, revelations he had received since the Book of Mormon. And then the Pearl of Great Price is the last one. Now, there are 5 sections to the Pearl of Great Price. One of those is called the Book of Abraham. Some of you have probably heard this story, but here's the short version of it. While the Mormon group with Joseph Smith as their leader, while they are in Ohio, a guy comes through with a traveling show. In that show, he has Egyptian mummies and he has Egyptian papyri with hieroglyphics on it. Now, in the 1830s, nobody could translate Egyptian hieroglyphics, except for Joseph Smith. He said he could. So he ends up buying that from this traveling salesman. All this is well documented. And he interprets it using the same technique that he interpreted the plates for the Book of Mormon. And what he said was, it was written by Abraham while he was in Egypt. Okay? So that becomes a part of, and it's still today, a part of the Pearl of Great Price, one of their 4 authority sources. It was believed that this papyrus was lost in the Great Chicago Fire until 1966, when someone discovered it in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Now, what had happened between 1830 and 1966 when it comes to Egyptian hieroglyphics? We learned how to interpret it. And guess what the Book of Abraham really is? It has nothing to do with Abraham. It's not even close to his time frame. It's about 100 years before the time of Christ, and it's actually I think it's a funeral text, if I can remember. Yes, it's an ancient funeral text. Has no connection whatsoever to Abraham. So that's one of the many issues that we struggle with. All right, that they struggle with when it comes to their authority sources. Now, I want to mention Sidney Rigdon. Anybody ever heard of Sidney Rigdon? Thank you for remembering. All right. Sidney Rigdon, he was one of the leaders of one of the splinter groups after Joseph Smith died. Rigdon is important to us because he was a significant preacher in the early Restoration movement. In fact, he was such good friends with Alexander Campbell that Campbell writes in his autobiography that when he was in that area on a preaching tour, he would stop at his house and stay with him. But Rigdon wanted more. He wanted to be more famous. He wanted to be more in charge. And so he attaches himself to Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith is the face, he's the salesman out front, but Sidney Rigdon was the guy who developed much of the theology of the Mormon Church. That's why when the Mormon Church was first incorporated in April of 1830, their name was the Church of Christ. They were the Church of Christ for the first 4 years of their existence until they changed it later. That's why Alexander Campbell in Millennial Harbinger wrote so much about this new upstart group, because his former friend Sidney Rigdon had left the Restoration movement and gone into this, and Campbell was very, very upset about it, as he should have been. So when you get into a lot of the beliefs of the Mormon Church, like baptism for the dead, you know, they do baptize. They immerse. They baptize. They baptize for the remission of sins. They baptize to fulfill all righteousness. They baptize to become a member of the church, to be part of the kingdom of God. They teach it is a promise and a covenant with God. All of that comes from Sidney Rigdon. He brought all of that and took all of that over. So there's a lot of similarities if you begin to study with someone of the Mormon faith, areas that there's some connection that you can draw parallels to and find common ground. Some of you mentioned watching things based on what we've said. If you want to watch something that's really fascinating about the Mormon Church, it's on Netflix. It's a 3-part miniseries. It's called Murder Among the Mormons. Murder Among the Mormons. And it has to do with this guy here, Mark Hoffman. That's him. And he is with the apostles. By the way, that's Nelson there. This is in the 80s. But he was part of the Quorum of 12 at the top, but he wasn't the main guy. This was the main guy here. And remember, they believe that they're all prophets. They hear from God. So Kaufman, here on the left, top left, who was a Mormon, he was an antique dealer, and he figures out a way to take documents, forge them and make them look old. He was a great forger. And he did things like signatures of Lincoln and Washington and all that. But his number one source of income was the Mormon Church. Being a Mormon, he knew all the things that were hot button issues for them. And the Mormon church knows, or has heard the rumors, that there's things out there that if they're ever discovered that are very detrimental to the Mormon faith. The Salamander letter is one of them. We don't have time to talk about it. But Hoffman forges the Salamander letter and other things and brings it to them. And you can see here, Utahns find 1828 writing by prophet. He forged all that stuff in the 80s, took it to them, and they bought it, paid him big dollars for it. And he finally got caught up with, he's in prison today. But Murder Among the Mormons if you ever get a chance. All right, I know that our time is gone. I wanted to talk a little bit about baptism for the dead. 1 Corinthians 15, complete misuse of that. That's why the Mormons are the #1 genealogist in the world, because they believe that people living today, if you can trace your genealogy back, you can do proxy baptisms for your ancestors and get them out of hell and get them into a right relationship. So every active Mormon temple has proxy baptisms, and when they do them all day long. And you may line up over here with Aunt Sally's name and go through, and you're baptized, and you come back around and you get Uncle Bob's name, and you go through over and over again. We don't have time to talk about all of their things that they've believed through the years. One of the worst is they were very, very racist. And so they taught that dark skin is a sign of God's curse, and no one with dark skin could even be a priest until the 1970s when they removed that. Okay? And then the last thing is they have a doctrine called lying for the Lord. And it's the same as what we've talked about with other groups. You can lie about things as long as it helps to promote or protect the Mormon church. Thank you for all your time and attention, for being here. I pray that 2024 is a great year for all of us. Don't be afraid to talk to somebody about Jesus. I believe in you. You can do it. God bless.